What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be giving a complete narrative breakdown, reaction, analysis, and review of the first episode in Season 5 of the supernatural dark fantasy drama television series, Stranger Things. And just so you guys know, this video will contain spoilers, so if for some reason you haven't gotten around to watching the first episode of this new season yet, and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video now. And with that being said, no more wasting time. Let's get into it. Now, I started watching Stranger Things a few months after the first season was released on Netflix, and my initial thoughts about the show was that it was interesting, and I liked the fact that the show took place in the 80s, in large part because it felt nostalgic for me. The kids at the center of the story are Gen X kids, like me, and in Season 1, they were just trying to find and rescue their friend and play a little Dungeons & Dragons, you feel me? And though for me, it's difficult for writers and directors to get YA shows exactly right, especially in the eyes of older audience members, mostly because you're watching kids be kids, and that can be frustrating as an older audience member. But I thought for the most part the Duffer Brothers did a fairly decent job of even that. And though I wasn't a Dungeons & Dragons player myself, I do remember the game, along with all the other 80s references scattered throughout the story. Add to that the science fiction-y aspect of the story, and overall, I just thought Stranger Things was pretty cool. And by the time I was done watching Season 1, I was hooked. And looking back on this series, I have to say that, to this point, I think it's the best YA series that Netflix has ever produced. And yes, that means I think it's better than Ginny and Georgia, and I also think it's better than Outer Banks. Now that we've got that out of the way. And judging by the show's viewership, I would contend that lots of other people think that as well. The only issue I've ever had with Stranger Things is the same issue I've had with lots of other sci-fi or fantasy shows, and that's that we go sometimes 2 or 3 years in between seasons in the production timeline. And I believe that has hurt Stranger Things over time, especially because the show heavily features child actors. And when your show heavily features child actors, you have to kind of get on with it in a way that you don't when you're dealing with actors that are already adults. Because in between seasons, especially the boys, these actors are going to shoot up as far as their height is concerned, and even their look and their aesthetic, right? They're going to grow fast during that particular point in time in their life, especially, like I said, once they've hit puberty. And if you're going to be taking 2 or 3 years between seasons, especially the male actors are eventually going to outgrow the characters that they're trying to portray. And we see in this show, especially when you take a look at Holly's character, who I believe is supposed to be 8 or 9, being played by Nell Fisher, a young lady who I believe is 14. And I have to say, she looks it. And we also see the effects of this phenomenon in Priya Ferguson's portrayal of Erica Sinclair, Lucas's younger sister, a middle school kid by Season 5 being played by literally a 19-year-old actress. In addition, I've watched the Duffer Brothers get a little modern for my taste in the telling of this story over the course of its 5 seasons, and most of it has felt a bit unnecessary, but despite how I feel about some of the plot points and character arcs in this story, I still do find the show moderately enjoyable. And as we look to finally wrap this series up over the course of the month of December, I'm still thoroughly invested in what the story's conclusion may wind up being. Now, Episode 1 in Season 5, entitled Chapter 1, The Crawl, starts with a flashback to 1983. With Will hiding in Castle Byers, smack dab in the middle of the Upside Down, singing Should I Stay or Should I Go by The Clash, when he is set upon by a Demogorgon. Now, Will shoots the monster with the gun he had when he was taken back at the beginning of the pilot episode, and then he takes off through the woods with the Demogorgon hot on his tail. He climbs a tree, hoping to hide above the thick fog, but the Demogorgon finds him and follows him up the tree. Will jumps to a nearby tree, barely escaping the monster's grasp before falling, getting his book bag caught on a tree branch, before ultimately falling back down to the ground and being dragged off by the Demogorgon. We then see him having been taken to the Hawkins library, where Vecna appears, using the hive mind to subdue Will and pump him full of Demogorgon tadpoles before approaching him and explaining, "At long last, we can begin." Vecna then uses said hive mind to essentially, again, pump Will's stomach full of Demogorgon tadpoles before continuing, "You and I, we're going to do such beautiful things together, William. Such beautiful things." Roll opening titles and credits. Now, this scene, though it's a flashback to the very first season of the show, is exposition. In fact, it's exposition to the exposition, if you ask me. It finally shows us in 4 frenetic minutes, what Will went through in the Upside Down before ultimately being captured by the Demogorgon and taken to Vecna, a Vecna we didn't even know existed yet because the world of Stranger Things had not yet expanded to the point of his inclusion from a visual standpoint, though we are made to accept that he always existed, narratively speaking. Now, I personally think Vecna was retconned, but what else? This scene is also put here so that we are made to understand what will become an important part of Vecna's plan for Hawkins, and seeing how this video is just about episode 1 of season 5, I'll save that for another video, but, if you know, you know. Next, we're taken to the Wheelers' residence, and here we learn that it's November 3rd, 1987. And inside the house, we see a 9 or 10-year-old Holly Wheeler setting the table, even though canonically she would be about 7 or so, but whatever. And as she does this, she's distracted by something that she sees outside. She walks over to the window as the sprinklers continue watering the front lawn, and we see that she sees someone standing outside. She smiles at the figure and waves, and we can see through the glass that someone is waving back, someone wearing a suit and a hat, before her mother calls out to her, asking her to round up the troops. And then Holly nods in the affirmative before she runs to the foot of the stairs and yells out loudly, "Breakfast." Now upstairs, Mike yells down to her in response, "Coming," before banging on the bathroom door, calling out to Nancy, demanding to be let in, explaining that if she doesn't let him in, he's going to take a whiz on the floor. Now at that point, the bathroom door flies open and we see Joyce Byers. And she says to Mike, "My apologies, whiz away." Before heading down the stairs, and we see Nancy open her bedroom door and admonishing Mike for his behavior as she follows close behind. Holly then opens the door to the basement and again yells, "Breakfast." And we see Jonathan and Will, who have been asleep downstairs, both awake. Jonathan, grabbing a nearby alarm clock, explains to Will that they overslept. Will asks, "I thought you were going to set an alarm." Jonathan replies, "I thought you were," before the pair get up. And then at the very crowded dinner table, or breakfast table in this particular case, we see both the Wheelers and the Byers having breakfast. Holly sits at one end of the table reading A Wrinkle in Time as everyone else fights over food. Holly's father, Ted Wheeler, sitting at the head of the table, clearly frustrated with the situation, asks Holly to pass him the bacon. She passes the plate of bacon to Nancy, who takes a strip before passing it across the table to Will, who also takes a strip, before he passes it back across the table to his brother Jonathan, who takes the last strip before passing the plate to Ted finally, with ne'er a strip of bacon left, which only seems to add to Ted's frustration. Next, we see Nancy and Holly placing dishes in the sink as Nancy explains that she'll be home at about 5 or 6, as Holly follows closely behind. Holly stops off in the living room and grabs her book bag as Jonathan and Will follow Nancy out the front door. Holly's mom, Karen, hugs and kisses her daughter before she also exits the house. And Joyce is the last to leave, remarking to Karen that she's so sorry that she can't stay around to help clean up, that she's already running late. Karen attempts to tell Joyce that it's okay, but Joyce closes the door before she can finish her sentence. Ted then approaches his wife, asking how much longer they'll be boarding the buyers. And Karen, in frustration, turns and replies, "What do you want me to do, Ted? Kick them to the streets?" And Ted replies, "Is that an option?" As Karen heads back into the kitchen, seemingly to clean up. And this scene is exposition in a way that the previous scene, I would say, again, was exposition to the exposition. This scene is supposed to catch us up after the time jump to what the Wheeler family and the Byers family have been up to in the subsequent year and a half that have passed since Vecna nearly destroyed Hawkins at the end of season 4. Here we see that the Wheeler family has been boarding Joyce, Will, and Jonathan for the last year and a half, and given that it's been a year and a half, we should assume that both Nancy and Jonathan have graduated from high school, that Mike and Will have been promoted to the 10th grade, and apparently that Holly has had 2 or 3 birthdays in that time, but I digress. Now from there, we see everyone leaving the Wheeler residence, Nancy and Jonathan in one car, Joyce in the one right behind them, and finally Mike and Will on their bikes, Holly following and struggling to keep up, asking Mike and Will to wait up. And as Holly finally manages to catch up to Will and Mike on her bike, she reminds her older brother that the morning show on the Squawk is on and that they're going to miss it. Mike then turns on the radio attached to his handlebars of his bike, and as everyone travels to their respective places in Hawkins, where they spend their days, we hear Robin's voice come over the airwaves remarking that it's her 500th broadcast, that the last DJ at the radio station left Hawkins after the Vecna event, that now they're all quarantined at the military's behest, but that essentially everything's going to be all right. We find her at WSQK in studio with Steve as she continues explaining that the split, as they call it, has been covered up by giant metal plates, that the kids should stop sledding on it, and that the residents should stay away from the military access control zone at the center of town. She continues explaining that the rest of Hawkins is there for the residents to enjoy, that someday soon the military will let them leave, and that in the meantime, they should just get on with their lives. That she is in fact doing the same because she has a date, but stops just short of telling all of Hawkins who it's with. She does, however, dedicate the song to the person, and this is where we see Vicky driving her car somewhere, listening to the song, smiling in response before the song is interrupted by interference, causing Vicky to say out loud to herself, "What the hell?" as she repeatedly hits the car stereo, hoping to fix the issue. We then go back to Robin in studio, who also remarks, "Whoa, what's going on? What the hell? What the hell?" Steve and Robin quickly exit the studio to try to find the issue, with Steve remarking, "I told you to stop thumbing your nose at the military." Robin explains that she was reiterating their rules and encouraging compliance. Steve remarks that Robin sounds sarcastic while she teases him for playing with a rubber chicken in the studio. Steve then reminds Robin that the people in the military watching over the town are very serious people, as Robin shouts an expletive repeatedly in frustration. Steve, in response, picks up a nearby walkie-talkie and calls Dustin, who we see riding his bike into the school parking lot. Dustin answers, remarking to Steve that he sounds swell before continuing, "Let me take a wild guess. You're not calling to wish me a good morning." Steve explains to Dustin that it's not a good morning, that they've got a situation down at the Squawk, that their signal has gone all wonky. He thinks that Robin finally pissed off the military. Dustin thinks Steve's assertion is doubtful, explaining that he believes Robin was encouraging compliance, explaining that the remote radio head is the more likely culprit. Steve doesn't seem to know what Dustin is talking about, and Dustin expresses that Steve should just read the manual. Steve explains to Dustin that the manual might as well be in Greek. Dustin replies, "Then learn Greek. I can't always be there to solve your problems for you, Steve," before he ends the transmission to Steve's frustration. He then turns to Robin, remarking, "Learn Greek. You heard that, Tone. You heard that, right?" And Steve tosses the walkie-talkie and walks away. And this sequence is simply a huge data dump, more exposition. And this is the place where you want these data dumps if you're going to have them. And I tell you guys all the time that in the first episode of the new season, the first act is almost going to always be exposition. This is the writers literally filling in the spaces so that we can catch up to our characters as quickly as possible. This is also Robin's character trying to assist the military in keeping the people of Hawkins compliant, even though she does it with a smart-ass mouth, while they go about the business of doing what they need to do to locate and control the threat that is Vecna, via the only gate to their knowledge at the center of town. So this series of shots, as it were, where we essentially just see people driving to where they're going as Robin DJs her way into the hearts and minds of Hawkins and its citizens, is mostly meant to simply give us as much information about what has happened as it pertains to Hawkins, the town, in the subsequent year and a half. It's been since, the gates opened and split, occurred, killing two birds with one stone, essentially. Exposition City, again, like I said. Also, where Vicky is introduced right after Robin talks about having a date and dedicating a song to her, that's called a passing transition. In this case, via dialogue, where a character talks about another character and then we cut to a scene that includes that character somehow, and so you kind of know who they're talking about. Now, the scene that follows, containing the conversation between Steve and Dustin, who we see showing up at school wearing his Hellfire Club t-shirt, is meant to show us that the death of Eddie Munson has hit Dustin particularly hard to this point, and it's changed him in some ways and his priorities since we last saw him. Dustin and Steve were two peas in a pod, if you remember from last season, and maybe that was done to signify that Steve needed to grow up. Even, Robin would ask him constantly during season 3, especially, like, how many children are you friends with? But in season 4, we saw Dustin kind of come of age, to where, he was leaving behind childish things, and when you combine that now with the death of his good friend Eddie, I do believe who in season 4 maybe even took the place of Steve as maybe the closest person to Dustin, we see now that Dustin's priorities may have shifted a bit. Here, still exposition, still the act of showing us what the characters are up to and maybe how the characters have changed since the last time we saw them. You should also make note that the power going out at the squawk is the catalyst of the episode, not to be confused with the catalyst of the season, or what I call the inciting incident, that when I use it more pertains to the season. Here, we're just talking about the catalyst of the episode, this particular hour of the story, that is. Remember, each episode has both a technical and narrative structure, the technical structure referring to how the episode is broken up into acts, and the narrative structure being the parts of the story within the technical structure, that being the exposition, the catalyst, or the inciting incident, whichever one, tomato, tomato, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and resolution. Here, the power going out the radio station will be the thing that drives the rest of this hour of the story. Well, an hour, so to speak, because this one goes a little bit longer than an hour. But just this hour of the episode, not to be confused with the inciting incident of the season that will come later, thereby the climax of the episode. Now, next we see Dustin walking down the hallway at Hawkins High and everybody looking at his t-shirt, and eventually he gets confronted by a guy named Andy, who remarks, "What'd I tell you about that shirt, freak?" Dustin doesn't answer, and Chance, another one of the jocks at the school, adds, "Andy asked you a question, freak. You deaf or what?" Again, Dustin doesn't answer. Andy, now standing next to Dustin, continues, "For his sake, I hope he is, because I thought I was pretty damn clear when I said I didn't want to see you in that shirt." Dustin replies, "Yeah, well, you told me to stop screwing your mom, and that didn't stop me, did it?" Okay. Andy then grabs Dustin by his shirt collar, slamming him against his own locker, exclaiming, "You think that's funny, Henderson? Hellfire is over, you hear me?" Dustin demands that Andy let him go, but instead, Andy rips the collar of the shirt as Dustin demands over and over that he stop, until finally Lucas yells out, and we see him approach the group. Andy remarks, "Well, if it isn't the traitor." Lucas reminds Andy of the time his sister kicked him in the balls so hard that he limped around for a week. This is what happened at the end of season 4. Explaining that if he touches Dustin again, he'll kick them so hard that they'll pop like water balloons. Then Mike appears with Will in tow and adds, "I say kick away. Stop this meathead from reproducing and further infecting the world with his unique brand of idiocy." Andy looks the boys up and down before he turns to Dustin and adds, I hope you brought a change of clothes. No one wants to see that shit. Before shoving Dustin against the locker once more and bumping Lucas as he walks past him and down the hall. And from there, we see the group walking down the hall together. And Mike advises Dustin that he has to stop provoking the jocks. Dustin remarks, oh, so this is my fault for wearing a t-shirt? Lucas reminds Dustin that he knows it's more than just a t-shirt. Dustin tells his friends that he can't just be like them and turn the other cheek while the jocks spread their bullshit about Hellfire and about Eddie. Mike reminds Dustin that Eddie never gave a rat's ass about what the jocks were saying about him. Mike then reminds Dustin that what Eddie would care about is finding and killing Vecna. Dustin replies, do you seriously think I don't care about that, Mike? Really? Mike replies, I think you're fighting two battles. You need to be fighting one. Will interjects, Mike's right, Dustin. What if you get seriously hurt? Foreshadowing. Lucas then adds, you're drawing attention. Remember what Hopper said, we need to keep our heads down. Will adds, follow the rules, blend in. Mike then adds, stay focused on our next crawl. Dustin interjects, do you even hear yourselves right now? Blend in, follow the rules? That's not what we've ever done. We stay true to ourselves. We're supposed to stay true to our friends. We stand up for what's right no matter the cost. Lucas exclaims, you're not listening to us. Before Dustin explains, no, you're not. And he turns and walks away. And as we see Dustin walk down the hall away from his friends, the camera pans over to a nearby wall and we see that Jane Hopper is missing, that there's a number to call, and that there is a reward for information leading to her location. So what we see here in this scene, or this group of scenes, if you want to divide it like that, is that Dustin, again, has taken Eddie's death extremely to heart. And Dustin feels responsible for continuing his legacy. And that legacy includes the Hellfire Club. We also see that the boys are growing up and that they're not so afraid of bullies anymore like they were when they were children. And this makes perfect sense because if you can fight a Demogorgons and Vecna, then random school bullies should be a piece of cake at this point. We also see again that Dustin's priorities might be different than those of the rest of the group. And he even explains to his friends that he does still care about finding Vecna, but it seems like the more immediate fight that Dustin seems interested in fighting is the one that returns Eddie's good name in the eyes of the Hawkins community. So we see that the rest of the group kind of wants Dustin to chill and keep his head down as Hopper had instructed them, probably so that he can better protect 11. And speaking of 11, as Dustin walks off, we see the camera pan over to the poster of 11 claiming that she's missing. And this is what's called a passing transition via photo, right? That's when you take a camera shot and you put it on a photo of a person, and then that shot leads us to the next scene wherein that person will appear for the first time. Or maybe it's not the first time here, because this is the first episode of the season. It will be the first time, we will now finally get to catch up with 11 and see what she's been up to. I see what the Duffer Brothers are doing here, stylistically within this episode already. So next, we find my girl 11 running through the woods. And we see soldiers also running through the woods, as if they're chasing something. We also then see a helicopter flying overhead, and inside the helicopter, there are soldiers pointing some kind of device down at a female running through the woods, as I said, as soldiers give chase. We then meet Lieutenant Robert Akers, one of the soldiers, as he emerges from a drain pipe, followed by other soldiers. And they continue chasing the young lady into a clearing, where she is then cut off by soldiers in Humvees with the same device that we saw inside the helicopter attached to the top, pointed at her. At that point, Lieutenant Akers emerges from the woods and he shoots the young lady with a dart, which seems to incapacitate her. He then approaches the woman, kneeling down over her, remarking, "You're a fast little shit, huh?" Before turning her over, and he looks surprised by what he sees. At that point, Lieutenant Colonel Jack Sullivan exits an MP vehicle, and Lieutenant Akers remarks simply, "It's not her. Another goddamn burnout, sir." And Lieutenant Colonel Sullivan replies, "Get her out of here," before a pair of soldiers carries the woman off. We then see Elle running through what we now know to be an obstacle course in the woods, made of ladders and cars mostly, as she uses her powers to destroy pumpkins set up on scarecrow stanchions throughout. She runs up ladders and slides down vehicles before finally using her powers to jump clear over a parked bus, foreshadowing. Before we see Hopper and Joyce standing nearby, Hopper, with a stopwatch, explaining to Elle that she completed the obstacle course in 12 minutes and 33 seconds, with Joyce remarking that that's a new record. And as Joyce and Hopper follow Eleven as she walks back through the obstacle course, Joyce asks Eleven how she's feeling. Eleven explains that she's okay, but Joyce, unsatisfied with her response, reminds Eleven that her time was 12 minutes and 33 seconds. Elle explains to Joyce that her time was 4 seconds too slow, and she lost 1 second on the climb, 2 seconds at the log, and that she can make her bus jump sooner, saving herself 2 more seconds. That would get her under 12 minutes and 30 seconds. As Elle drinks a Gatorade, Joyce explains to her that she has to take it easy on herself. In frustration, Elle slams the bottle down on the hood of the car and asks, "Do you think Henry's going easy?" Hopper interjects, "You know what I think? I think we still have more of that waffle mix, and I think we should celebrate this record time with a stack of those, and then maybe we could watch a Miami Vice marathon." Hopper then holds out his hand for Eleven, but instead of her doing the same, she simply tells Hopper that she can beat the time and asks him to reset the course as she walks back towards the start. Hopper insists to Elle that she's tired, that she's going to injure herself, but she continues walking, insisting again that he reset the course. We then see Joyce and Hopper resetting the course, with Hopper slamming a fresh pumpkin down on the makeshift scarecrow frame. And this group of scenes starts off with a fake out. The scene of Elle running through the woods are cut together with soldiers running through the woods to give us the impression that the soldiers are chasing Elle through the woods, but that's not what's happening at all. Now, this scene, it doesn't last very long because pretty quickly we can tell that Elle is wearing different clothes than the woman that the soldiers are chasing through the woods. So we know that they're not chasing Elle, but what this group of scenes does tell us is that they're looking for Elle, that the posters that were put up at the school were likely put up by military personnel simply to help them find Elle. We also finally get a chance to see what else Elle has been up to in the last year and a half, and apparently that is training with Joyce and Hopper in the woods for what they believe will be a final showdown with Vecna. We get a chance to see that Elle has learned to use her powers to perform a few new tricks, and that she's even maybe gotten stronger since the end of season 4. The devoted bus jump is clearly foreshadowing. That's the writer showing us that she can jump over a bus using her powers now, preparing us so that in a later episode, when she actually jumps over something substantial, we understand that she could already do this and how that came to be. We also see that she's trying to complete the obstacle course in under 12 minutes and 30 seconds for a reason to be named later. And also, the cuts here are pretty good. When Hopper slams his pumpkin down on the scarecrow stanchion or the scarecrow frame, that's when it cuts to the next scene. So the cuts here are kind of very stylistic that the Duffer Brothers are using, very interesting ways to get from one scene to the other. And here we're still in the exposition part of the episode. Again, you've got a bit of an ensemble cast in this show. So before we move out of the exposition phase of the episode, we need to be caught up with everyone, essentially. That would be when the chessboard, as it were, would completely be set up, and then we can move towards the inciting incident and then into the rising action portion of the episode. So next, we see a Bradley's Big Buy truck approaching a military checkpoint just outside of town. And as the truck pulls up to the gate, it stops, and a soldier comes out to greet the driver. And we see my man Murray, who leans out of the window, explaining to the soldier that his name is Austin Milbarge, ID 45289er. The soldier stares at Murray as he checks the logs and then essentially opens the gate. This scene is simply reintroducing us to Murray and letting us know what he's been up to and how he will continue to serve the group in this final season of the story. And it seems like he will be contributing by way of smuggling in to town the shit that they need to complete their missions and to essentially find and fight and hopefully kill Vecna. Now, back at the Squawk, we see Robin looking for the technical manual, frustrated, expressing that the manual must not exist, and this is to fix the problem with the radio head. Jonathan asks if someone can try Dustin again before Robin explains to Jonathan that Dustin turned off his walkie. Nancy asks what's up with him lately, and Steve replies, "Don't even get me started." So, of course, we see that now Nancy and Jonathan have arrived at the Squawk, which is where they were going earlier in the episode, right? Nancy manages to find the manual, and everyone gathers around as she flips through the pages. Steve, leaning in really closely over her shoulders, stops her on the page that explains how the remote radio head works. Robin asks where they're going to find the remote thingamajig, and Nancy seems to have a eureka moment, because Nancy's smarter than everyone. The group then walks outside, and everyone looks up. Robin claims she doesn't see it, but Nancy replies, "It's up there somewhere." Robin asks, "So I guess someone's got to climb to the tippy top of this bad boy without a harness or anything. Seems kind of dangerous." Steve then replies, "AKA job for good old Steve Harrington." Robin laments Steve speaking about himself in the third person before Jonathan interjects, "I actually think this might be a better job for Jonathan Byers," as he takes off his jacket. Meanwhile, Robin looks at Nancy, and the pair playfully roll their eyes at one another. Steve then pats Jonathan on the back, exclaiming, "I'm like 1/4 monkey, dude. I got this, Byers. Don't sweat it." And Steve walks towards the tower. Robin then reminds him of the voltage. Steve then replies, "I'm not an idiot," and walks to the shed next to the tower to turn off the power. But by the time he walks back outside, Jonathan is already climbing the tower. Steve asks Jonathan what he's doing, and Jonathan replies, "I got this, dude. Don't sweat it." So Steve, in a panic, runs to the other side of the tower and begins climbing, and the pair race to the top. Now, back on the ground, Robin turns to Nancy and asks, "What is it about your presence that brings out their inner Neanderthal?" And at that point, my man Murray pulls into the parking lot, and Robin asks, "I thought grocery delivery wasn't till tomorrow." And Nancy replies simply, "Me too," which means Murray's early for some reason. Meanwhile, Steve and Jonathan continue their race to the top of the radio tower, both of them reaching the top platform at almost the exact same time. Jonathan manages to find the loose plug and reconnect it quickly, but Steve hits the box it's connected to, and the green light comes back on as he remarks, "Never fails." Both the guys then lean over the side of the platform, yelling down to the ground in unison, "I fixed it," but they notice that both the girls are gone. Now, down on the ground, Murray opens the back of the truck as Nancy and Robin stand by. He unloads from the back of the truck a fresh telemetry tag as he explains that they're scarier than hen's teeth, enough bullets and shells for Hop to start a small war, if he should so choose, foreshadowing, grenades. This is kind of like a Chekhov's gun situation too, that he hid under lettuce, and Gatorade for Elle's battery. And at that point, Steve and Jonathan arrive at the truck, and Steve asks, "Did somebody say Gatorade? Let me get one." Murray tosses Steve the Gatorade before revealing that he also brought him peanut butter boppers. Steve, who is excited, claiming he missed them, thanks Murray for the treat. Murray then explains to Jonathan that he brought him a jazz tape of John Coltrane, explaining to him that he knows he's allergic to jazz, but that he should give this tape a whirl because he might find it quite engaging. Jonathan takes the tape and quickly shoves it in his pocket as Nancy looks on, making a weird face. And finally, Murray takes out a manila envelope and smacks Nancy over the top of her head, explaining that what's inside is the reason for his premature delivery. Nancy then opens the envelope, and it appears to contain a manifest of some kind. Nancy explains that it's a burn, before Murray explains that it's too soon, and that whatever the military is doing in the Upside Down, that it evidently needs serious resources. Robin then doubles down, explaining, for us, that there's a lot of cargo listed on the manifest. Murray explains that a supply drop that big would take a minimum of 2 hours. That's for us. Nancy expresses that that would give Hopper plenty of time for a crawl before Murray replies, "Maybe tonight's the night we finally find that bastard and end this." Now, this particular scene starts to get us into the logistics of the story contained within the episode. The power went out at the radio station, so the group at the radio station have to figure out how to fix it. So they're looking for the manual. They find the manual. They figure out how to fix the issue. They got to climb the tower, plug the cord back in, and apparently hit the box. So that gets done here as well. We also get the last bit of exposition in these scenes, and it involves what looks like a rekindling of the very same love triangle that existed back in season 1 of the show involving Nancy, Jonathan, and Steve. I don't know why they're doing this, but okay. Here, we see that in the year and a half that it's been since the last time we saw these characters, Jonathan does not seem to have enough of a hold on his relationship with Nancy that Steve, at the very least on the surface, appears to be trying to impress upon Nancy that he's the guy, not Jonathan. And you guys might remember that in season 4, Steve was telling Nancy about how, getting married and starting a family and driving a Winnebago around with said family was something that Steve had interest in, and that he eventually explains to Nancy that once they got back into the Upside Down to find Vecna, that Nancy was there too, that he wonders if he had gotten his act together earlier, if they might still be together. So it's clear that Steve now understands that Nancy is the girl. And Steve maybe had a chance to impress upon Nancy that she was the girl, because remember, Jonathan was in California and in Nevada and in Utah looking for 11 with his brother Mike and Argyle last season. And when Jonathan finally made it back to Hawkins at the end of last season, while they were fixing up Hopper's cabin, he specifically asked Nancy if they were okay, and she said yes. But it was clear that a conversation was going to need to be had, and it would appear that in the year and a half that they've been living under the same roof at the Wheeler's house, the year and a half that Vecna has essentially been nowhere to be found, that they have yet to have that conversation. And in this scene, we also see that Murray smuggles contraband into the quarantine zone and also intelligence on the military movements inside the Upside Down. And this is the very thing that will be the jumping off point for the rest of the episode. Everything that the characters will do will be done based off this particular moment in the story. The very plot point that takes us out of the exposition phase of the story and now into the rise in action. The next thing we see Dustin exit his class after the bell rings, and he walks down the hall and enters another classroom. And inside that classroom, there's a corn snake in an aquarium that Dustin refers to as Jake, the snake. And as he stands outside the cage, he asks Jake if he's up for a little field trip. Now, this is a brief scene that is meant to be purely logistical, right? This scene is simply setting up a later scene in the episode. Dustin clearly plans to take this snake and do something with it, and considering we've watched Dustin have issues with Andy and Chase and the other jocks, you can simply assume that the snake will be used in some way to exact some sort of revenge against the people that are harassing Dustin at school. But this scene is the start of the rise in action of the episode. And again, like I said, it's mostly logistical. And then when I say logistical, I simply mean just a scene that kind of shows us the progression of some sort of plot or plan in a specific character's episode arc. Nothing really important gets said here. It's more about something important getting done. And that's what this scene is. Now, from there, we find Lucas, Mike, and Will in the cafeteria having lunch. Lucas expresses that Dustin has lost his damn mind, that he told him he wants to start Hellfire again. Mike asks Lucas when Dustin said that, and Lucas replies, this weekend he was talking about finding the lost sheep, and that's something that Eddie talked about last season. So again, still him being fixated on somehow resurrecting Eddie's good name. Now, Will interjects, and we thought the shirt was bad, before Lucas reiterates that Dustin has lost his damn mind. Now, just at that point, Dustin appears, slamming his tray on the table and taking a seat at the head of the table, where Eddie used to sit, and asking his friends, who's lost his damn mind? After an awkward silence, the guys claim that it's Andy who's lost his mind for the way he came at him this morning. There's another awkward silence before Mike's portable radio, positioned nearby on the table, comes on again, and it's Robin, apologizing for the abrupt departure. She apologizes for the annoying technical difficulties, but promises to make it up to those that are listening with a very special treat. She then plays the song Upside Down by Diana Ross, and Mike asks his friends to quickly hand him a piece of paper. We also see Hopper and Joyce, still at the obstacle course, listening to the radio as well. And as the song continues to play, Robin explains, now, before you start bumping, here are some facts about the boss. She was born Diane in the north end of Detroit. Berry Gordy, that's Gordy with a G, signed her to Motown in 1961. And 1 is the key number because between 1964 and 67, the Supreme had 10 songs hit the top of the charts. That's right, 10. Then, in 78, she tried to make it big in the movies with The Wiz, which was a colossal flopperoonie. But in my personal opinion, I still dig it. I mean, Michael Jackson as a scarecrow? Give it a chance, but make sure you bring your supersized popcorn because this movie has a runtime of over 2 hours. All right, class dismissed. And we see Mike taking copious notes in the cafeteria, surrounded by his friends, and we also see Hopper taking notes at the obstacle course as Joyce looks over his shoulder. And in the studio, Robin ends her soliloquy, "I hope you guys were taking notes. There will be a test later. Take it away, Diane." Now, back at the obstacle course, as 11 finishes another run, Harper explains simply, "Crawl tonight." He grabs the radio and he hurries off. Now, back at the cafeteria, Mike and his friends quickly grab their things and make their exit. At the radio station, Nancy, Jonathan, Steve, and Robin head down to a secret basement, leaving the radio studio completely unattended as the song continues to play. Meanwhile, Hopper, Joyce, and 11 walk onto the school bus that she jumped over and open a secret compartment that leads to a series of tunnels. And this cluster of scenes is essentially yet another data dump where these scenes are intercut together, where we get information via broadcast by DJ Robin, Rockin' Robin, but this time, instead of the information being used to explain to us what the characters have experienced since the end of season 4 finale, like we get earlier in the episode, this is where Robin disseminates information to the other characters that the characters will then use to devise a plan for what we can all assume will be an expedition into the Upside Down that they call a crawl. Now, this is the next step in the rise in action in the episode, by the way, in case you all were confused about that, right? This is just kind of setting us up to see what will happen moving forward in this particular episode. So from there, we see Nancy and her group head down to the basement of the radio station, and we see Nancy grab an overhead projector. Meanwhile, we see Mike and his friends head out to a wooded area with a picnic table nearby the school, where Mike has a map of his own and small Monopoly-like pieces, D&D figurine type figurines, where he dumps them out onto the table. Now, Nancy projects a map of the Upside Down onto the wall and explains to the rest of the group, assuming Murray's intel is correct, the supply convoy is set to reach Hawkins at 10 sharp, meaning I want Hopper in the tunnels and en route to Max Z no later than 9. Don't know why, Nancy's giving everyone orders, but okay. Meanwhile, at the picnic table, Mike explains to Lucas that they'll take their usual observation posts before he places pieces on the map. Back in the basement of the Squawk, Nancy continues, barring any unusual traffic, I expect the convoy to reach Max Z at 10:15. Now back at the picnic table, Mike continues to explain that once the burn starts and there's sufficient cover, they'll signal Hopper, who will then make his move. Now back in the basement of the Squawk, Nancy continues, and now the crawl begins. Hop is now in the Upside Down, traveling at what I hope will be a gentle 30 miles an hour. That's for us. And this will allow Dustin and Harrington to follow along in the right side up. That's also for us, according to Mike. He then explains to Dustin that has to remember to try and keep the telemetry signal within negative 60 and negative 70 dBs, decibels. And Dustin explains, that should be easy peasy. Now, back in the basement of the Squawk, Nancy continues explaining, I expect the convoy to take the same route as last month, Maine to Cornwallis, one turn. She then tries to explain to Steve about hitting red lights before Steve interjects, telling Nancy that he'll just blow right through them. Nancy reminds him to watch out for MPs, explaining to him that if they get pulled over, they lose Hop, and they're toast. And Steve replies simply, I got it. Now, back at the picnic table, Mike continues explaining to Dustin that they're going to travel up Cornwallis for about 6 miles, and that as the convoy reaches the Shell station, that they'll radio to Hop to disembark, according to Nancy. That will drop Hop off at the border of G1, according to Mike. And then Nancy explains to her group that once he's there, he'll have 2 whole hours to search for Vecna, which is ample time that he's cleared zones much faster. She then continues rather proudly, all in all, signs point to another successful crawl. The others look at Nancy strangely, which prompts her to ask, is there a problem? Jonathan stutters at first, but eventually answers, no, I think we're good. Steve then interjects, explaining to Nancy that it's really good, before Robin interjects, explaining to Nancy that Zone G1 is not all that exciting or Vecna-y. She continues, I mean, what does it have? A circuit city, a couple of houses, and a big buy? With Dustin asking Mike back at the picnic table, what are the chances Vecna's shopping for Lucky Charms? Mike explains to Dustin that it doesn't matter, that they should stick to the plan, which is to break into the Upside Down the only way they can, through the Max Z. I don't think that's true, but okay. Under the cover of a burn, and that once inside the Upside Down, to search one zone at a time methodically until they figure out where Vecna's been hiding. I don't think Mike remembers that 11 can open gates to the Upside Down. I mean, she's been doing it the whole series, so I don't know why she wouldn't be able to do it now. But I digress. Back in the basement of the Squawk, Steve introduces the idea that Vecna could be dead, citing that they're at crawl number 30 and there hasn't been a single baddie in sight, that Elle can't find Vecna in her bath, and that Will hasn't had his goosies since the shake and quake. That last they saw Vecna, he was roasting like a turkey and pumped full of lead, and that was before he fell 3 stories. If you remember last season, that's what happened in the finale. Steve asked Nancy if it ever occurred to her that they might be scouring a battlefield of a fight they've already won. Jonathan asked Steve if he's forgotten that Vecna showed Nancy that it was Hawkins on fire and that Karen, Holly, and everyone was dead. Steve explains to Jonathan that Vecna also showed Max her brother walking around with a hole in his chest, but that's what he does. He gets in your head and tries to scare you. Nancy replies, he did a good job because I am scared, and you should be scared too, because if he's still out there, he's planning to end our world. And at the picnic tables, Mike expresses, we don't stop looking even if it takes 100 more crawls, 1,000. We don't stop until we're goddamn sure that wrinkled, noseless, rotten bastard is dead and gone and never coming back. He then puts his hand in the middle of the table and asks if everyone's in. Lucas immediately puts his hand in, followed by Will, and as everyone waits for Dustin expresses, I want to see Vecna's heart on a platter. Just wish I could do it myself. And Dustin finally puts his hand in with everyone else's. All of the kids express that they want to complete the mission for Eddie before Lucas expresses, kill Vecna on 3. The kids all count to 3 together and shout, kill Vecna, in almost a celebratory fashion. And I think that's a little misguided. I don't know why they would be crunk about all this. I think they'd probably be more scared and worried given everything that they've seen. But I digress. And just then, Will starts to have a feeling. Like Drew Hill. He turns and looks behind him as if someone's there. He begins to breathe more and more heavily as he slowly looks to the sky, and the sky starts spinning from his POV until he becomes dizzy, grabbing onto a nearby tree as the others finally notice. They all run over to him asking if he's okay. Will expresses to them that he's fine. Mike asks Will if it was Vecna, and Will explains that he doesn't know, that he just had a crazy feeling, that the sky was spinning. He tells the guys that maybe it was nothing. Maybe he just gets nervous sometimes before crawls. Lucas explains that he gets nervous too, but that the sky doesn't spin for him. He didn't ask Mike if it ever spins for him, and Mike explains that maybe Vecna's close. And that seems to terrify Will. And at that moment, the kids hear the bell ring, and Mike reiterates that they are to meet at the Squawk at 6 o'clock and not a second later. Keep that in mind. They all agree once more before heading back to class. Now, in this collection of intercut scenes, the writers are continuing to establish now a narrative vehicle that the writers are using quite a lot in this episode, and that's the intercut scenes, the back and forth, right? I think they're using it quite a bit, but given the episode's runtime, I guess you kind of just want to convey some of this information as quickly as possible so that an episode that's an hour and 8 minutes long doesn't become an hour and 30 minutes long. So I guess, we're okay, right? But like I said, this episode, the writers are taking scenes that are happening at the same time, but in different places, and they're intercutting them, right? with using different characters to explain to different groups of characters what the plan actually is, right? So a lot of this information is for our benefit, right? And that's what we see happening here. The same thing, the same people conveying the same information at the same time. Nancy's in the basement of the squawk explaining the very same plan to Jonathan, Steve, and Robin that Mike is explaining to his friends at school. And the writers have decided to intercut these scenes, essentially flipping them back and forth and so on, in an effort to save time, I would assume. It's also a stylistic choice, too. But again, like I said, just from a visual choice, I think it's kind of being overused. But like I said, as far as them kind of progressing the episode and getting us the information that we need to kind of set the episode up as quickly as possible, I understand why they're doing it. And here we also see that Mike is essentially the leader of the subgroup that involves his friends from school. And this goes back to them seeing Mike as a leader of their party since they've been little kids, right? We'll even set as much as we even saw that as much as last season on their way to find 11 when Mike, when Will showed Mike the painting that he made that he had been working on. It depicted Mike in front of the party, leading the party. When they were in the van, Will kind of explained to him that you're our leader. You know what I'm saying? So that's what we're looking at here. We also see that Nancy is the leader of her little subgroup, which includes her two boyfriends, Jonathan and Steve, and Robin. But what's also at play, if you pay close attention to the dialogue, is that at the very least, Nancy sees herself as the leader of everyone, including the third subgroup, which includes Hopper, Joyce, and 11. Nancy has this look on her face of true frustration when Jonathan doesn't come out and immediately agree with her plan. And she seems to get even further annoyed when Steve and Robin suggest that the zone they're searching doesn't make much sense and that they may have already won the battle against Vecna and that maybe all these plans are a waste of time. That's something I think we should pay close attention to moving forward as the final season unfolds, especially if it gets to the point where the group has to come back together as one and now people have to decide whose orders to follow. Now, this group of scenes is mostly logistical from a narrative perspective, as in the characters have simply taken information that Robin has already disseminated over the airways, information that they received from Murray, and now almost like a hive mind, use that information to construct an identical plan. Even though they're in different places and there's no such thing as a cell phone here in 1987 just yet, or even the beepers I haven't seen yet either, but I digress. Now, from there, we see the sky spinning, just as it was for Will in the woods near the school. And we find Holly laying on a roundabout as her friend Mary explains that she's going to get the ride going and then they're going to have lots of fun. And at that point, a dude named Derek Turnbow shows up and begins spinning the roundabout much too fast, scaring Holly as Mary tries frantically to get him to stop. Now, eventually, Derek runs off laughing as Mary brings the ride to a stop. Holly yells out at Derek, "Jerk face?" And Derek replies, "Bite me." This dude got a mouth, boy. This little kid, he need his mouth washed out with soap for real. As Mary helps Holly off the ride. Mary asks Holly if she's okay, and Holly explains that she is, just as Miss Harris comes outside ringing a bell, explaining to the children that playtime is over. But Holly doesn't go inside with the rest of the kids. It appears she sees someone at the gate nearby. She waves at the person and heads in that direction instead. Miss Harris notices and calls after her as she follows. Holly approaches the gate and there's a man in a suit standing there. And this is clearly the man that we saw standing outside of her house earlier in the episode. And as Holly walks up to him, she says simply, "Hi." And as Miss Harris finally gets close enough to hear the conversation that's being had, we hear Holly tell the man that she can tell Derek to go away too, that he's a jerk face, that Miss Harris gave her something that we can't hear all of a sudden, but that she also said it wasn't her fault. Now, this scene introduces us to Mary and Derek, two kids that go to Hawkins Elementary School with Holly, and we see that Mary is likely one of Holly's friends, and that Derek, in Holly's own words, is a jerk face, a little bit of a bully. Now, we also see for the second time the man in the suit. The first time we saw him in the reflection in the window at the Wheeler residence earlier in the episode when Holly became distracted by him when she was supposed to be setting the table for breakfast. And now we see the man in the suit again as she approaches him at the gate. But the big reveal is that when Miss Harris approaches Holly having the conversation with this man, we see that she can't see him at the very least. And that Holly has an imaginary friend, so to speak. But we also know in the world of Stranger Things that that's a bad sign, right? And this may be even a way to harken back to the book that Holly's reading during breakfast, A Wrinkle in Time. And I'll get into that a little bit later on in the video here, but we'll power forward with the recap and breakdown. So this scene shows us in short form what Holly's day at school was like, which prepares the audience for Holly's character to become much more important to the story than she has been to this point. It's also contributing to the rising action in the episode arc, another thing that moves us forward towards the climax of the episode eventually. And also notice that we don't get a chance to see Mr. What's-Its face. So, from a director's standpoint, they want to make certain that we don't get to see who this person is. For narrative reasons, you're trying to hold on to that little secret until later on in the episodes. I mean, I understand these episodes, the first 4 episodes dropped at the same time, so most of you know already this is Henry, a.k.a. Vecna, a.k.a. One. But if you were watching this episode as a standalone, the reason why we don't see his face is because the writers are trying to save that reveal for a later point in the season. Now, next, we're introduced to Sergeant Ramirez as he enters a lab in a military installation. And we also are introduced to Dr. K, who he approaches, who is busy dissecting a specimen that the military found in the Upside Down. Dr. K notices Sergeant Ramirez is there and asks, "Are you just going to stand there, Sergeant Ramirez, or did you have something to report?" Now, Sergeant Ramirez apologizing before he explains to Dr. K that Lieutenant Colonel Sullivan tracked down the lead that they spoke about, and we actually saw this. Dr. K asks if it was another tremendous success, but Sergeant Ramirez replies, "No, unfortunately." Dr. K remarks, "I see they don't teach sarcasm in the ROTC. If it was good news, Sullivan would be here himself with trumpets and confetti, I have no doubt." At that point, one of the specimens trapped in a glass case beside Sergeant Ramirez lashes out at him, scaring him. Dr. K explains to Sergeant Ramirez that he shouldn't worry that it doesn't bite, but that it does on occasion strangle. Foreshadowing, right? That's foreshadowing. She then asks Sergeant Ramirez if there was anything else, if there might be a new lead, perhaps to offer more false hope. Sergeant Ramirez replies, "Not yet, Doctor," before he salutes her and then turns to walk away. But Dr. K stops him, explaining, "Please tell your commander that I'm running into a wall here. People are dying, innocent people." She then turns and looks at Sergeant Ramirez in the eye and explains, "I need the girl," before Sergeant Ramirez finally continues on his way. Now, this thing is a little bit different as it provides a ton of exposition, a tinge of exposition, as it introduces us to brand new characters that seem important to the story moving forward in Dr. K. Also serving as rising action in the episode, the stakes are being raised, right? And in this season, we learned that Dr. K is actually the one who's been looking for 11, that she's the one who's been ordering Lieutenant Colonel Sullivan to find her in the first place, maybe even as far back as last season when they were on the hunt for her. We're also introduced to a particular specimen that was found in the Upside Down that we don't know the name of, but that Dr. K explains doesn't bite, but on occasion strangles. Now, the reason that's important is because we're told the nature of the specimen clearly because at some point in time in the episode or in the season, the specimen will come into play somehow. So we need to understand what the specimen could do. And this is also an act of foreshadowing. And last but not least, we see that the military base has a presence in both the right side up and in the upside down. Now, this is something that we kind of already knew because if you paid attention to the dialogue, Nancy and Mike spoke about this, and Murray did briefly as well. But this is the first time that we get a chance to actually see the military installation inside the Upside Down. And again, in all this, the action, she's still rising, right? This is, the stakes are being raised. Oh, the military is after Elle. What's going to happen if they find her? That's what this scene is for, and that's why it's placed where it's placed, right? In the rising action section of the story. Now, from there, we see Hopper, Joyce, and 11 trekking through the underground tunnels. And it's kind of interesting to see where these tunnels came from. I know that there were a lot of tunnels that got tunneled during earlier seasons, so I would assume that they didn't dig these tunnels, that they just kind of repurposed them, but we're not really sure or clear. It would be interesting that these tunnels go exactly where they need them to go, but I digress. Elle asked Hopper, the last run, what was my time? Harper explains that he's not sure, that he didn't see, that he was distracted by Diana Ross. 11 explains to him that she saved 4 seconds. Harper explains, I highly doubt that. Joyce interjects, insisting that 11's final time was very fast. 11 explains further, 1 second on the climb, 1 with the log, 2 on the bus. Harper replies, great, you did that today, you can do it tomorrow. And as Harper attempts to climb the ladder at the end of the tunnel, 11 insists, the crawl is tonight, Hop. If I'm under 12 minutes and 30 seconds, I can come with you. That's what you promised. Hopper replies, yeah, I promised that. I promised it, but I didn't see it. So blame Diana. And Hopper climbs the ladder, which leads into the shed across from his cabin. Now, as he exits the tunnel, followed by Joyce and 11, she continues, you didn't think I could make the time, did you? Hopper replies, I think you can, but not today. I don't think you made that time. 11 asks, are you saying that I lie? Hopper replies, no, I'm saying you're mistaken, as he opens the door to the cabin, again with 11 and Joyce close behind. 11 insists that she isn't mistaken. Hopper replies, okay, you're on your 6th run, you're totally drained, and you just happen to break your 2nd record of the day right before a crawl. I don't think so, kid. 11 replies, you saw the time, I saw you look down, you have to let me go with you. Hopper replies, you want to find Henry so bad, don't you? Do it from the tub. Do it remotely. You're not coming with me today. End of story. And Hopper walks into his bedroom, closing the door behind him. Joyce then enters Hopper's bedroom asking why he's being so hard on 11. Hopper explains that he's not being hard on her. Joyce explains to him that 11 is just trying to help. Hopper explains to Joyce that it would be great if Will could help, but that she keeps him in bubble wrap. Joyce explains that that's different, that Elle is ready to contribute. Hopper replies, 37 crawls. The only thing I found down in that damn place are soldiers, lots of them, and they're all looking for one person, Elle. So there's no reason to put her life on the line and bring her down there, especially not for some recon mission. Joyce asks, well, if it's just some recon mission, then what's with all the guns? Pay attention to that. Hopper explains that the guns are in case he runs into trouble. Joyce replies, or in case you run into him. Hopper replies, no. If I run into that psychic freak, I'm tucking tail and running. I'm nuts, but I'm not that nuts. Hopper then sits next to Joyce on the bed and continues, I'm going to need Elle. I know that, which is precisely why there's no point in risking her life over some stupid recon crap. I want her primed, but I want her safe. Safe until the very last minute, okay? Joyce replies, yeah, okay, but her time on that last run, did she make it? Hopper replies, smirking, with a second to spare, before the pair share a kiss and Joyce leaves the room. And once Hopper's alone, he opens a secret compartment in the wall and carefully removes a bag. Now, this group of scenes conveys some specific information about what exactly it is that transpired between Hopper and 11, specifically in the subsequent year and a half since the end of season 4. Apparently, Hopper made a deal with 11 that if she could run the obstacle course that they've built in 12 minutes and 30 seconds or less, don't know what's so important about that specific amount of time, though I'm sure it'll get explained to us at some point, that she can go inside the upside down on a crawl with him. Maybe that's the amount of time, he typically does a crawl in. I don't know. But now it's pretty clear why Elle wants to do this. She wants to find Henry and destroy him once and for all. And Hopper is trying to prevent 11 from going on the crawls with him, even though he made a deal with her that if she completed the obstacle course in the allotted time, that she could accompany him. Now, I think he's doing this for 2 reasons. One, he's still being her father and protecting her at all costs. The other reason is more strategic. Hopper seems to understand full well that he'll need Elle to be ready when the time comes, and that she will indeed have to risk her life to save the world one last time. But as he explains to Joyce, there's lots of soldiers in the Upside Down, and all of them are looking for Elle, so he doesn't want to risk getting her captured on a meaningless mission that could potentially mean they lose the war for humanity in the process. We also see in this scene that Joyce is kind of being 11's mom, right? That she's there for moral support, if you will. And she believes that Elle is ready to try and contribute, and she tries to convince Hopper of the same. She thinks that Hopper wants to defeat Henry, a.k.a. Vecna himself, so maybe so that 11 won't have to do it. But Hopper explains to Joyce that he understands he's no match for Vecna, that if he sees him in the Upside Down, he's going to tuck tail and run, that he's nuts, but he's not that nuts. But we also see here that while Joyce is in complete support of Elle's participation in the battle for humanity, she's not at all in support of her son contributing in the same vein. And Hopper mentions that fact to Joyce as they argue in his bedroom about Elle's participation in the fight. We also see right at the last second that Hopper removes a bag from inside the wall, and Hopper does indeed recognize the danger of what he's doing, venturing into the Upside Down by himself, and that whatever is in the bag is likely some kind of fail-safe in case he gets caught. It could also mean that he is indeed, hoping to run into Vecna so that he could kill him so that nobody else has to do it. And this scene is mostly logistical, though there is some pertinent information that we get through the dialogue here. This is the next step in Hopper preparing for the crawl, right? He goes back home. He tells Elle she can't go with him. He grabs a bag out the wall. He's ready to rock. It's also character development for Hopper and Elle as well. His character is just here to help facilitate. Joyce's character is just there to help facilitate that development. And at this point, we're still in the elevator moving slowly towards the climax of the episode. So rising action, slow and steady. So from there, we see Andy open his locker to find Jake, the snake, hanging out inside. Now he's scared by the snake, yelling out, "Jesus Christ," as he falls to the ground. And the other students begin to laugh. Another of the students remarked to Andy that it's just a corn snake. And the students all laugh at Andy as one of them asks if he pissed his pants, and the other asks if that's his new pet. And as he sits there on the ground, staring back up at his locker, he sees a message that Dustin left on the inside of the locker that reads, "Hellfire lives." And again, this scene is purely logistical, right? It's just the next step in Dustin's episode arc, if you will. We saw him in a previous scene leave his classroom and go into the classroom where Jake the snake resided, asking if the snake was up for a field trip. And now we see exactly what he did with the snake. He put it in a locker in order to scare Andy. And he also left a message, right? This is a short scene whose only contribution to the episode is to move Dustin's piece across the board. One more step, right? And we're still seeing rising action, just to be clear. Now, next we go back to Hawkins Elementary, and we see that Mike is waiting outside for Holly, and he's looking at his watch, which would indicate that, he's pressed for time, that maybe Holly's late or taking too long. He finally decides to go into the school, and we find Holly sitting on a bench in the hallway reading her book, A Wrinkle in Time, reading her book. As he approaches, he asks Holly what she's doing, explaining to her that he has to get going. Holly replies, "Sorry, they told me to wait." Mike looks inside the window to Miss Harris's classroom to find Miss Harris talking to their mother. So Mike sits down beside Holly and asks, "Is this about your mystery friend again?" So Mike knows about this imaginary friend, Mr. Whatsit. Holly explains to Mike that Mr. Whatsit's only trying to help. Mike asks, "Help how?" Holly explains that he's trying to protect her. She explains to Mike that Mr. Whatsit says that there are monsters in Hocking, that they like to eat kids like her. Mike expresses to Holly that monsters aren't real. Holly replies, "I don't believe you." I don't know why she would believe him after everything she's seen, right? Mike remarks, "I know you're scared because of everything that's happened. With the crazy stories that people tell, I get scared sometimes too." Holly replies, "No, you don't." Mike continues, "Are you kidding? Everyone in Hawkins is scared shitless, and anyone who says they aren't are full of it. Like that mouth breather in your class. What's his name again?" Holly replies, "Derek." So apparently Mike knows about Derek and his bullying too. Keep that in mind. Mike continues, "Yeah, Derek. He probably wet his bed every night. Do you know who I turned into when I get scared?" Holly shakes her head no, and Mike takes off his book bag, opens it, and pulls out a figurine as he continues, "Mike the Brave. He goes on adventures called dungeon crawls." Holly asks Mike what a dungeon crawl is, and Mike explains, basically he explores these underground worlds where he fights monsters, evil wizards, sorcerers, and stuff. And Mike, the Brave, is never scared. So whenever I'm feeling frightened or nervous, just imagine that he's at my side and I feel better. So maybe the next time you get scared, you don't need this Mr. Whatsit. Maybe you just need Holly the Heroic. Holly asks, "Holly the Heroic?" Mike explains that he was going to wait a few more years, but he reaches into his bag and pulls out another figurine, this one female, and he gives it to his sister, explaining that she's a cleric, which means she has divine powers, that she can cast spells of protection against evil spirits, and even cooler, that she can cast a dimension door, which can teleport her to anywhere she visualizes. He then continues, I mean, come on. Can this lame Mr. What's-It do any of this? Holly laughs, replying, no. Mike then promises Holly that the figurine will keep her safe, and they sit there waiting for their mother to finish talking to Miss Harris. Now, this scene, though logistical, in that it is the result of Holly being caught at the gate talking to her imaginary friend, Mr. What's-It, it also effectively works as both character development for Holly and foreshadowing, because here we learn the origin of Mr. What's-It, that Holly essentially created him because she's afraid, with everything going on in Hawkins, with everything she's seen since season 1 when she was very little. You guys might remember in season 1 where she walked into Joyce's bedroom and all the lights started flashing everywhere. And she takes comfort in knowing that Mr. What's-It is there for her. This is also foreshadowing in that as Mike gives her the figurine explaining that she's a cleric, that tells me that Holly at some point, again, if you've watched all these episodes, may kind of have clerical powers as well, right? Opening dimension doors and casting spells and stuff like that, right? I'm thinking she may even be able to have similar powers that Will has. Again, if you've seen all these episodes, then you know Will has an X-Men moment in episode 4. And I think this is foreshadowing to the point that Holly may end up being able to utilize some of these powers as well. Maybe not as well as Will, because she's not as old, not as strong or whatever, but I feel like Holly's going to be some help in kind of the battle to come against Vecna. And hearing this scene, we see Mike's trying to be a good big brother to Holly, and he tries to reassure her that everything will be okay, even though he understands that at the moment, that might not exactly be true. And he's even made a figurine for her, which I thought was sweet, and it gives her a token to make her feel safe enough that maybe she'll stop talking to Mr. What's-It and their mother won't have to come to school anymore and have meetings with her teacher. And this is still the rise in action. Now, next, we see Will at the hospital with Lucas sitting over Max's bed, and Will explains it was this weird feeling or something that he hadn't really felt before. Mike thinks it could mean that Vecna's close, that he's finally reemerged, and if he has, maybe we'll fight him tonight. He then looks over at Lucas and asks, what do you think, Lucas? And Lucas replies, yeah, I think we'll find him this time for sure, but he says it like he's not exactly sure, right? Will then asks Lucas if he wants to play the tape for Max, explaining he's going to go grab a Coke or something, caffeinated, because it's going to be a long night. But before he leaves, he asks Lucas if he wants one, and Lucas replies, no, I'm good, thanks, just as Will exits the room. After he's gone, Lucas just sits there staring at Max, who lays there still unconscious. He stares at a small drawing taped to the wall near her bed before he takes out the cassette tape, pops it into the boombox, presses play, and we hear Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush, which, if you remember, is one of Max's favorite songs. Now, from there, we see Will in the hallway buying a Coca-Cola Classic in the can. I remember that. And as he looks up, he sees Robin getting off the elevator. He calls out to her, but she doesn't see him, and she looks like she's headed somewhere with purpose. Now, we then see her enter a hospital room with Vicky, who's there working as a candy striper. So that's where Vicky was headed when she was driving earlier in the episode. Robin enters the room explaining, okay, so I have good news and bad news. Vicky smiles, asking Robin what she's doing there. Robin continues, a good friend once said bad news first, always, so I have to cancel our date tonight. Vicky looks disappointed, replying simply, of course. Robin then continues, but the good news is I made us a reservation, 8 p.m. tomorrow night at Enzo's. Vicky stops in her tracks and turns, asking Robin how exactly they're going to be able to afford that. Robin replies, you mean, how am I going to afford it? Because you, my dear, are paying for nothing. Vicky replies, double how then? Robin explains jokingly that she stole money off the dead guy they just wheeled out of the hospital. Vicky explains, wait, that's not funny. His name is Mr. Pendergast, and he was very nice. Robin continues joking that he was also very rich. She continues, look, dinner is on me, okay? But maybe for dessert, I could see you in this hat, and like only this hat. Vicky replies, I hate you, and Robin pushes her against the wall, and the pair share a laugh and kiss just as Will approaches and sees the pair through the crack in the door. How convenient. He drops the Coke and runs off, frightening Robin and Vicky initially, and the pair open the door just in time for Robin to see Will scampering down the hallway. Vicky asks, who was that? And Robin simply remarks to herself out loud, shit. And she knows they caught. Now, the first scene in this group of scenes is purely logistical. All it really does is update us on the current state of Max. We see here that she's still in a coma, the same coma that she's been in since last season, the end of last season. We also see that Lucas is there with her, but that's no different than what we've already seen as well. But what is different in this scene is that Will is sitting there with him. And the only reason Will is here with Lucas is so that Will could, through going into the hall and buying a soda in the second scene, see Robin arrive at the hospital and then follow her essentially to Vicky and find out that she's a lesbian in the third scene, a closeted lesbian at that. Now, the reason why this is important is because if you've seen Stranger Things to this point, then you already have a pretty good idea that Will is gay and that maybe he's even had a thing for Mike at one point, and we see the writers building the case for Will being homosexual since way back in season 3 when he got angry with Lucas and Mike for not wanting to play D&D because they were both in relationships, Mike with 11 and Lucas with Max. And as Lucas attempted to ride away in the rain, Mike said to him specifically, "It's not our fault that you don't like girls." That was a pretty specific turn of phrase, and that kind of gets doubled down on in season 4 when Jonathan and my man Argyle and Mike and Will are searching for 11, and you can see it in Will's face that he maybe is in love with Mike. Now, we never get full proof of that, but it certainly feels like the writers were hinting that Will has feelings, complicated feelings for Mike, but that part of the reason why that torments him is because I think he absolutely knows that he can never really tell Mike, or at the very least, he won't be able to act on those feelings for a number of reasons. Maybe he ends up telling Mike at the end of the series, right? At the very end. But, you know, those feelings, I think if you're asking me right now, I think those feelings will certainly be unrequited. And this is the writer slowly building Will's confidence in himself through having him learn from Robin that it's okay to be who he is, even though he lives in a small town in the Midwest in the 1980s. And Will gaining confidence is going to be key to the overall story moving forward. Again, if you know, you know, right? Next, we find Dustin arriving over at the Roan Hill Cemetery, having gone there to visit Eddie's grave. And as he arrives, he notices that someone has written the words "burn in hell" in what he believes is red paint across Eddie's tombstone. Now he kneels before the tombstone, staring at it, remarking, "Don't worry, Eddie, eventually they'll get bored." He then removes a container of lacquer thinner from his book bag along with the rag before he realizes that the tombstone isn't covered in red paint, but that instead it's covered in blood. He then notices Jake the snake's dead body buried beneath the leaves at the foot of the tombstone, which frightens him as he looks up to find Andy approaching him, remarking, "You really should keep a better eye on your pets, Henderson." Chase, Andy's homeboy, who is also present, then adds, "It's dangerous out there. They shouldn't be left alone like that." We then see high school jock number 2, and I'm not kidding, who remarks, "Hey there, freak, long time no see," followed by high school jock number 1, who simply says, "Hiya." And look, that's a lame line right there, especially from high school jock number 1, right? He's supposed to be at the top of the high school jock, unnamed high school jock pyramid, right? Get that man some good lines to say. And I was so disappointed. He's the only black dude. I'm really, really disappointed. And hiya. Come on, bro. Like, you got to get your weight up. Anyway, Dustin laughs as Andy approaches, which prompts Andy to ask, "Something funny, Henderson?" Dustin replies, "No, I was just thinking in Eddie's last campaign, I defeated Vecna, the acolyte, by casting prismatic spray. 1d8 turned up a 7. Violet." Andy replies, "Is that supposed to be English, freak?" And the jocks all laugh. Dustin continues explaining, "Well, violet prismatic spray is the deadliest. You know why? It causes blindness." And at that point, Dustin shoves Andy and reaches for the lacquer thinner, dousing the jocks with it before they all finally jump him. And Dustin fights valiantly before he's eventually overtaken by the group. The jocks then pick Dustin up off the ground and they hold him as Andy proclaims, "Hellfire dies with you, Anderson, and it dies tonight." Dustin, now bleeding from his mouth, spits in Andy's face. Andy responds by punching Dustin violently in the face several times before he falls to the ground, and the group begin kicking him repeatedly. And as this is happening, we hear Lucas's voice come over the walkie explaining, "Dustin, this is Lucas. Do you copy? Over. Dustin, do you copy? Over." And this scene, believe it or not, isn't as much logistical as you might think, because I don't know that there's any real reason for Dustin to go to the cemetery to visit Eddie's grave on the day that the group has a plan to crawl, except for the writers wanting to put Dustin in a situation whereby the plan that the group has so carefully made will be compromised, right? Compromised by the fact that because Dustin got his ass taxed by the jocks, he is now not going to be where he's supposed to be when he's supposed to be there. And this will be the beginning of things going very, very wrong moving forward for our plucky band of heroes here in the episode. Meanwhile, back at the Squawk, we hear Lucas still calling for Dustin over the walkie, explaining, Dustin, you're over an hour late, man. You're making us nervous. We need you here at the Squawk. Dustin, if you can hear us, please respond. Over. And at this point, Robin comes running out to the guys, explaining that she just got off the phone with Dustin's mom and that she hasn't heard from him either. Steve seems frustrated, but Will explains that Dustin will show up, that he always does. Steve tells Lucas to try Dustin again, and Lucas again tries to raise Dustin over the walkie as Mike sees 11 approaching with Hopper and Joyce in tow. 11 approaches Mike, and the pair share a hug before 11 looks over at the rest of the guys, noticing that something isn't right. A few moments later, we find Mike and 11 sitting on the roof of the radio station. 11 asks if Dustin is okay. Mike explains that he hopes so, that Dustin had been acting weird lately. 11 asks, weird how? Mike explains that Dustin has been angry, scared, reckless, and not himself. Elle explains that Hopper has been acting the same. Mike remarks, maybe it's just getting to us, you know? Being stuck in here, not knowing where Vecna is, no end in sight. I mean, we're really starting to lose it. I mean, we really need to catch a break. And maybe we will, because earlier, Will had a feeling. 11 explains that if Will had a feeling, then Mike cuts her off, expressing that it means something. Maybe tonight's our break and maybe our last crawl. We find Vecna and we end this once and for all. 11 looks worried and asks, and then what happens? Mike replies, you mean after you totally demolish Vecna? In my campaign, if the party wins, they all live happily ever after. 11 asks, happily how? Mike replies, well, usually what happens is the party doesn't return to their local village because too much has happened. They've seen too much. So they travel to a faraway land, a peaceful land, somewhere beautiful, with like 3 waterfalls or something, and they start all again together. 11 asks Mike if he thinks that could be real for them. Mike replies, yeah, of course. I mean, not the 3 waterfalls part, but the other stuff. Yeah, of course. If Vecna's gone, then what's stopping us? 11 smiles at the thought before Lucas calls up to them, explaining that the chief's almost ready. He continues, let's do this, come on, and Elle and Mike follow him inside. Now, this group of scenes are kind of ominous because in the last scene, we get the main characters talking about expectations, right? Elle wants to know what happens after all this is over, and those can be dangerous conversations because typically speaking, if the writers go to all that trouble to have main characters spell out what they expect to happen once the final fight is over, chances are they're not going to get to that ending. And given the fact that Elle is the one who's asked the question and Mike is the one who's answered it, that would lead me to believe that maybe Elle and Mike might not be long for this world. But again, as I said, this scene was put in place chiefly to raise the emotional stakes for us, the audience. If we know what Elle wants, then we become invested in whether or not she gets it. And then an episode that's that passed an acceptable runtime for an hour long, right? This isn't a scene that we necessarily needed from a logistical standpoint. This is a scene we get, again, for character development purposes, to raise the emotional stakes for us, the audience, and we're still in the rising action portion of the story, in case you were wondering. I also had a thought that this could be the conversation that leads to how this story ends, right? I won't get into too much what I think the ending will be right here in this part of the video, but I'm going to have a series of videos that I do on Stranger Things, and eventually I will tell you guys what I think the ending could potentially be. Now, next, we see Joyce helping Hopper get ready for his crawl as the high school boys, minus Dustin, prepare for their part of the mission. Jonathan approaches Hopper, handing him a tracker and wishing him luck. Robin communicates with Steve, asking if he's getting a signal from said tracker. Steve has trouble operating Dustin's wheelie thing, and he calls back over the walkie, asking if anyone knows how it works. Inside the station, Robin asks if anyone has any ideas. Will explains that there's a safety lock, that Steve should look for a small switch under the wheel. Robin conveys Will's instructions. Steve feels like a safety is a lot for the wheel, and that is unnecessary. But he manages to unlock the wheel and quickly figures out how it works, explaining to Robin, though, that he's getting a signal, but that it's pretty quiet. He continues turning the wheel until the signal reaches 90 dB, at which time he calls back to Robin explaining that the signal is holding a steady 90 dB. He then asks how he's supposed to monitor the tracker and drive without Dustin's help. Inside, Hopper asks if anyone's heard from Dustin, referring to him as Inspector Gadget, right? Mike explains that they have not. Will volunteers to monitor, but Joyce refuses, explaining, no, you're staying here. Will explains to his mother that he helped Dustin set up the antenna, that he knows how it works. Joyce replies, out of the question, it's just a wheel. Will explains that it's not just a wheel. Joyce then asks Jonathan if he can work it. Jonathan looks at his brother first, but then replies, yeah, I think so. Hopper interjects, you better not think, you better know, because if you lose me out there, I'm not coming home. That's for us. Jonathan reassures Hopper, that he can handle it, and Hopper and Joyce walk upstairs. Now, next we see Jonathan enter the van outside the station. Steve, now sitting in the driver's seat, asks, you comfortable back there, Byers, or you want me to get you a pillow? Jonathan tells Steve to just focus on driving as he puts on his headphones. Steve then starts the van and drives away as Mike and Lucas pedal their bikes behind him, all while Elle stands there watching, unable to contribute. Now, this group of scenes is directly tied to an earlier scene in the episode where we see Steve and Jonathan competing for Nancy's attention when they climb the tower in an attempt to fix the issue at the top. Though the competition doesn't make much sense when you step back and consider the whole story we've been told to this point, that's ultimately the reason why we got this scene to begin with, because now we know that Dustin is going to be unavailable to do his job now, and that Steve and Jonathan will have to set their rivalry aside in order to work together. These scenes are also simply to put the next feasible step in the group dispersing to execute the plan that they so carefully put together, making these scenes part logistical, but also narratively relevant to the episode's arc as a whole, and we're still in the rising action phase of our episode, to be clear. And look, I want to tell you guys that most scenes are at least in part logistical, right? Because what I mean by logistical is they are the next step in completing the character's episode arc or the episode arc in its totality, and maybe even from a larger sense, the season arc, right? So, just when I say logistical, that's what I mean. Is that, okay, this happens and then that. Because this, then that, right? That's what I mean by logistical, right? The plot points kind of moving in the direction, because this, then that, right? Now, next we see Hopper opening a cover in the woods behind the radio station, leading to one of the tunnels as Joyce stands by. Hopper climbs inside and Joyce remarks, try to get back to me in one piece, okay? Hopper just stands there halfway down the ladder and looks at Joyce, who asks, what? Hopper replies, sorry, I'm just looking at you. You get more beautiful every day. How is that fair? Game. Hopper then begins to climb further down the ladder as Joyce remarks, you didn't answer my question. And Hopper replies, I know, you didn't answer mine, before closing the hatch to the tunnel, leaving Joyce standing there to, I guess, worry about whether he'll get back to her safely or not, right? And this scene is essentially just logistical. And again, it's one of the things that we only really get to see because the writers are preparing us for what could end up being a longer separation of the characters than the characters themselves may think in the moment. So the writers give us a proper goodbye, so to speak. This is, again, the Duffer Brothers creating emotional stakes, right? They want to remind us that we care about the relationship between Joyce and Hopper in preparation for that relationship to be threatened somehow. So there is a bit of foreshadowing here as well. And again, we are still in the rising action part of the episode. Now from there, we go to the Wheeler residence, and more specifically inside Holly's bedroom, where we see she's doing some work making a necklace for the figurine that Mike gave her earlier. And once she's done, she smiles at it before taking it over to her mirror, and she puts it around her neck, smiling again for a moment before she hears a conversation going on downstairs. Now, she creeps down the stairs to find her parents arguing, with Karen explaining to Ted that Holly was standing at a fence at school talking into thin air. Ted expresses that Holly was probably talking to herself, that it's hardly the first child to have an imaginary friend. And Karen explains to Ted that she wouldn't be worried if Holly was 5 years old, but that she's not 5. Karen then asks Ted if he even knows how old his daughter is. I thought this was a weird line. Ted explains to Karen that she's being ridiculous, that he doesn't want to talk to her when she's like this. And as he gets up from the table to walk away, Karen expresses that he doesn't even know how old his daughter is. Now, Ted asks Karen if the drink she's had is her first one that night or if she's already on number 2. Karen replies, does it matter? as Holly scurries back up to her room, slamming the door behind her before jumping into bed, and she starts to cry. Now, this conversation is logistical for the most part. It's another scene where, in the episode, again, being 20 minutes or so longer than your typical hour-long episode, is maybe one we could have done without. But what we do get here is Karen expressing to her husband that Holly is having issues at school, or in general, I felt like the dialogue here was a bit ridiculous, but maybe the writers are trying to express that Karen is drunk, as Ted does mention that she typically has multiple glasses of wine every day, and that he doesn't want to talk to her when she is like the way that she is at the moment. We also get a sense from this scene that Holly feels lonely in her own house because while everyone's off on secret missions, she's stuck at home with parents who are clearly having marital issues. Because remember, Karen thought long and hard about sleeping with Billy back during season 3. And my man Ted, every time we've seen him, has seemed a bit checked out, right? And though we're getting there, we're still in the rising action portion of our regularly scheduled program. So next we find Hopper moving through the tunnel, Dolo, until he reaches the ladder, which he proceeds to climb. He then surfaces in the Radio Shack inside the Max Z, back at the radio station. The Left Behind kids sit and listen. Joyce radios Mike and Lucas asking, "Squawk to Crow's Nest, anything? Over." Mike replies, "Negative, not a peep." Mike notices Lucas chewing a piece of gum extremely loudly, and he turns asking, "Do you have to chew so loud?" Lucas replies, "Snipers chew gum." Mike sarcastically reminds Lucas that he's not a sniper, just as the military convoy approaches the Max Z. Lucas, seeing this through his binoculars, remarked, "Package incoming. 4 trucks, outer east gate on Main." Mike radios back to Joyce, "We got action. 4 trucks, outer east gate on Main." The trucks approach the gate. The burners are then deployed. Lucas, seeing the goings-on, reports, "Burners headed for the gate." He then holds up 5 fingers as Mike looks on, and he radios back to Joyce, "Burn commencing in 5, 4, 3, 2, and boom." The burners begin clearing a path into the upside down through the open gate. The trucks didn't then enter the Max Z, and Mike reports to Joyce and Hopper. The trucks drive past the Radio Shack, and Hopper quietly asks, "Am I clear?" Lucas and Mike report that all is clear to the east. Hopper then asks about the west. Lucas holds up a fist. Mike reports that Hopper should hold because they have a straggler. The last soldier finally walks away, and Lucas signals Mike, and then Mike reports that the way is clear. Hopper then quickly exits the Radio Shack, climbing into the back of the 4th truck. Lucas explains to Mike that Hopper is in. Mike reports to Joyce that Hopper is in, and everyone back at the station seems relieved, none more than 11. The trucks then proceed into the upside down before the gate closes behind them, and Mike reports he's flipped. That's cute. Now, these scenes are purely logistical. They're just showing us something that's already been explained to us. They're giving us the visual of how Hopper has been sneaking into the upside down to look for Vecna over the past year and a half. They're showing us essentially how well the group works together to make this happen. Again, something we already would assume if they've been doing this for a year and a half and have yet to be caught. They're clearly fairly good at it, and so again, this is just a visual showing us how the plan comes together, so to speak. More rise in action. Even though I gotta say, them being able to pull this off for a year and a half and the military still having no idea that this is happening is a little bird brain, but you know, I mean, it's television, I suppose, but I don't know. I digress. Now from there, Joyce raises Jonathan to see if he has Hopper's signal. And after fidgeting with the wheel a bit, he lets his mom know that he snagged it. Steve, who's sitting in the driver's seat eating junk food, boppers, asks if he should move, and Jonathan tells him no. He continues watching the decibels climb while instructing Steve to hold until the decibel counter reaches 90, at which point he tells Steve to go, and Steve floors it, leaving the alley where they've been parked, turning onto the street. Now back at the squawk, Joyce let everyone know that the van is on the move, and Nancy begins documenting the advanced movements on the overhead projector. Now, later, Joyce tries to raise Hopper again, asking if he can hear them okay. Hopper explains that he can hear them loud and clear. Joyce replies, "Good, hard part's over." Hopper replies, "Speak for yourself. I still got to jump out of this thing. And is it me, or are we moving faster than normal? Keep in mind, remember, Nancy talked about them going at a smooth 30 miles an hour, so apparently they're driving faster than that, right? And that was kind of intricate to their plan. So we already see the plan starting to come apart a little bit, even more, after Dustin's, missing in action, right? Now, Joyce explains to Hopper that he is moving a little faster and that he should just aim for the grass. Hopper replies, I was going to go for the asphalt, but now that you mentioned grass. And at that point, the truck hits something. Everyone inside the basement of the Squawk seems frightened by the sound. It's a big boom, right? Now, in the Upside Down, the convoy is forced to stop to avoid crashing into each other. Joyce shouts, what's going on, Hopper? On the street, Jonathan explains to Steve that they're losing Hopper's signal, ordering him to stop the van. Jonathan quickly searches for Hopper's signal again and eventually finds it to Steve's relief. Joyce repeats, Hopper, do you copy? As Elle looks on, frightened. Hopper eventually replies, yeah, I copy. Joyce asks, what the hell happened? Hopper replies, I don't know, we just slammed to a stop. Robin asks why the convoy was stopped. Elle explains, the soldiers. They know he's there. Nancy interjects, we don't know that. In the back of the truck, Hopper takes out his gun. He points it at the empty street, staring through the scope. Now, back in the basement of the Squawk, Elle explains that there are too many soldiers, that Hopper can't take them, as she paces back and forth. And at that point, Will gets the tingles, the goosies, right? And we look through his eyes and we see something galloping down the street in the Upside Down, headed right towards the parked convoy. Hopper hears the growl of a Demogorgon. The sound comes through the microphone sitting on Joyce's desk, and the kids in the basement all shiver with fright. In the Upside Down, soldiers standing on the street begin to open fire, and we see through Will's eyes the Demogorgon attacking them. The lights begin to flicker violently at the radio station, and equipment in the van begins to go haywire. Steve asks Jonathan what's going on, but Jonathan has no idea. He's not Dustin, right? Hopper's truck backs away from the other parked vehicles and begins to try to drive away from the scene, but the Demogorgon gives chase, and Hopper is accidentally shot in all the chaos. The Demogorgon eventually catches up with the truck, killing the driver, causing the truck to crash into a tree as the monster runs off. I find it interesting that the monster didn't kill Hop, but gotta love that plot armor, right? Now, back at the radio station, Will faints, startling his mom and his friends, and the power finally goes out. In the Upside Down, Hopper emerges from the crashed vehicle, injured but well enough to move, and he hears the growls of the Demogorgon in the distance. He calls out to the Squawk, but with no answer, and eventually decides to pursue the Demogorgon into the woods. Now, back at the radio station, as Joyce finds a flashlight, or Nancy finds a flashlight. It is Nancy. Joyce tries to wake Will, but as Will lays there, still incapacitated, we again see through his eyes as the Demogorgon races through the Upside Down, eventually arriving at the Wheelers' residence. Will finally comes to, hugging his mom, still frightened by the event. Joyce attempts to comfort him, explaining to him that she's there for him. She tells him to breathe and then asks him what happened. Will explains that he saw it. Joyce asks him what exactly it was that he saw, and Will replies, the Demogorgon. It's coming for them. Joyce replies, for who? Who is them? And Will, still terrified, looks over at Nancy. Now next, we see Nancy and Eleven walking out of the basement at the Squawk with Robin close behind. Nancy explaining, contact Hopper, the boys, tell everyone what's going on. She then asks Robin if she thinks she can get the power back on, and Robin replies, I can try. Nancy replies, you do. You call my house and tell everyone to get the hell out of there. And she and Elle leave the station together. Now, at the Wheeler house in the right side up, we find Mr. Wheeler in the backyard hitting golf balls in the dark. Because, I guess that's what he does when him and his wife get to arguing about imaginary friends that their daughter sees. Now, inside the house, we find Miss Wheeler on that Marvin Gaye and Chardonnay, you feel me? She empties the bottle into her wine glass and then heads upstairs, walking right past Holly's room. Now, inside Holly's room, we find Holly still in bed crying when her night lights begins to flicker, and Holly gets up to check it out. The rest of the lights in the room begin to do the same, and Holly becomes a bit afraid. She calls out to her mom as the ceiling in her room begins to break, revealing the Demogorgon trying to enter her room from the Wheeler house in the Upside Down. Holly lets out a scream upon seeing it, and the Demogorgon roars in response. Cut to black. Now, this group of scenes essentially functions as one giant set piece, if you will, taking us from the truck entering the Upside Down with Hopper in the back, headed towards, we assume, the military installation, and coming under attack, and then the result of the attack and the scenes are all being highly logistical, right? Nothing of any real importance gets said during this whole event, other than maybe Will warning Nancy about the Demogorgon, but the Demogorgon was coming for her family, right? But despite this group of scenes being overwhelmingly logistical, they were extremely important in setting up what is to come. And these scenes are essentially the climax of the episode, that being the convoy coming under attack. That's what the entire episode had slowly been building to. And typically you would have falling action after the climax and then some sort of resolution that leads us into the next episode, but we don't really get that here. What we get here instead is the Duffer Brothers deciding to end the episode on the climax cliffhanger, which makes it a little bit different than what you typically might expect the structure for an hour long to be. But I thought it still worked fantastically, right? Now, the writing in this episode focuses on multiple narratives, as is normal in this particular show, with the A story being the group preparing for their 31st crawl as they hunt for Vecna in the Upside Down behind the military's back. The B story being Elle training with Hopper and Joyce in order to hone her powers in preparation for a final confrontation with Vecna, and the C story involving Will and his evolving connection to Vecna and to the hive mind as he works to accept himself for who he is. Now, there are also smaller subplots at play, like Holly and her relationship with Mr. Whatsit, and the reincarnation of the love triangle involving Nancy, Steve, and Jonathan. Now, the teaser of the episode involves Will hiding in Castle Byers in the Upside Down, getting found by the Demogorgon, and ultimately taken to Vecna. And this section lasts 4 minutes and 23 seconds. We know this is a teaser, again, because it happens before the opening title and credits. We can also tell this is the episode's teaser because it's completely narratively separate from the rest of the story told in this episode, as in it's not contained. This is something that happened a long time ago in the narrative of the story. So it kind of separates itself from the story that's being told right here and there in the present. Will being trapped in the Upside Down as a child, 4 years ago, narratively speaking, doesn't have anything to do with Will and his friends now looking for Vecna in the Upside Down. Again, narratively speaking, right? This is just us seeing what Will went through in the Upside Down. So keep that in mind. Now, the first act starts at the Wheeler residence, where we see that the Byers have been living with the Wheelers since the end of season 4, essentially a year and a half ago. And this section lasts for 17 minutes and 2 seconds. It also includes Holly seeing Mr. Whatsit outside the window before breakfast, her riding to school with Mike and Will, Robin and Steve working at the radio station, Nancy and Jonathan en route to said radio station, Vicky en route to work, the tower failing, and Steve and Robin needing to find a way to fix it, Dustin rejecting Steve's request for help, Dustin getting confronted by the jocks for his fashion choices at school, and then getting into an argument with his friends, Elle training with Joyce and Hopper, Nancy finding the manual for the tower, Steve and Jonathan fixing the tower, and ultimately Murray showing up with the intel and supplies for the group. Now remember, the primary purpose of Act 1 is to essentially set up the story. This is where we're introduced to the main characters, or in this case, reacquainted with the characters that we already know. In this case, that would include Mike, Nancy, Jonathan, Will, Holly, Joyce, Elle, Hopper, and Murray. It's a lot of characters still left in the final season of this show, boy. And here, we're also introduced to their world as it exists right now, before the rise in action takes us to the climax of the episode, that being the thing that changes everything for them, ultimately moving the season forward. Here, we see that basically all the main characters are back together again, most of them even living together at the Wheeler residence, and they're making a plan to find and defeat Vecna for good as they prepare to execute their 31st trip into the Upside Down since the split at the end of last season. But on a smaller scale, where the individual characters are concerned, we see that Nancy has graduated from high school, is still living at home, is a station manager at the Squawk, and fashions herself the de facto team leader of our merry band of heroes. Meanwhile, she hasn't redefined her relationship with Jonathan since his return from California last season. We see that Mike, who is still in high school, we assume has been promoted to the 10th grade, has stepped forward even more so as the leader of his friend group while adjusting to the fact that he can't see Elle as much as he might want to because the military is searching for her. We see that Elle is training hard in addition to hiding out in Hopper's cabin in preparation for one last confrontation with Henry, a.k.a. Vecna, a.k.a. One, and that she is chomping at the bit to get at him, right, and end his reign of terror, right? She wants the smoke, all the smoke, right? We see that Jonathan is just kind of along for the ride here, working essentially as Nancy's glorified assistant, hoping that he can finally win her back in the process. We also see that he's maybe thinking about marrying her. We see that Robin has found a job as a DJ at the Squawk, likely hired by Nancy, the station manager, and uses her talents to send coded messages to the various factions of their friend group without the military becoming the wiser, which I think is kind of batshit crazy. I don't understand, but okay. We also see that she's now dating Vicky, who she met at the end of last season. So Robin is kind of getting something that she wants romantically. She's, kind of came out to Steve a couple of seasons ago looking for a female to date. Now she's got one. Now, speaking of Steve, we see that Steve works essentially as Robin's assistant and that he may still be in love with Nancy. I'm not sure about that. What I will say is that if he's not in love with Nancy, then that means his character arc has kind of come to an end, and that means he might die. But he seems to be taking every opportunity to show her what a changed man he's truly become after his confession late last season, while Jonathan was away. We see that Lucas essentially is the muscle of the group now, right? He's quit the basketball team. He waits by Max's bedside for her to wake up, and he waits for instructions from Mike, who seems to get his marching orders from his big sister as it pertains to what the plans will be moving forward. We see that Dustin is obsessed with clearing Eddie's name and continuing his legacy at Hawkins High School through resurrecting the Hellfire Club, to the point of being distracted from the main thing, even if it upsets his friends and the other students at his school. We see that Will is just afraid mostly, as he continues to experience phenomena associated with Vecna and the hive mind from the Upside Down since his return to Hawkins. We also see Will struggling to kind of, just accept himself as he is. We see that Hopper has been venturing into the Upside Down using military drops as a cover in order to locate and potentially kill Vecna. We see that Joyce is another character that's just kind of along for the ride, being overly protective of Will while offering support to Eleven, and I guess dating Hopper as she prepares for the fight of her life, right? We see that Mr. and Mrs. Wheeler are frustrated by having so many long-term house guests, but they seem to be dealing with that frustration differently, right? Ted is just kind of tapped out and basically complains, while, Karen just kind of vents her frustration seemingly at Ted. We see that Holly feels so afraid and so alone that she's created an imaginary, or rather invisible, friend that she calls Mr. What's-It. We see that Murray has been making supply runs in and out of Hawkins while gathering intel for the group in order to assist Nancy in the planning of their missions into the Upside Down. And finally, we see that the military covered the split with metal plates and that Lieutenant Colonel Sullivan is still on Elle's ass, all the way on it, right? Now, Act 2 starts with Dustin getting the snake out of the classroom, and this section lasts 15 minutes and 13 seconds. It also includes the boys talking in the cafeteria, Robin sending a coded message to the rest of the team, Nancy, Mike, and Hopper explaining the plan for the impending crawl, Will getting the goosies, Holly talking to Mr. What's-It during recess at her elementary school, Sergeant Ramirez reporting to Dr. K at the base in the Upside Down, Elle trying to convince Hopper to let her go on the crawl with him. Now remember, Act 2 is about putting the plan in motion. It's about trying to implement whatever idea the main character or characters might have and seeing if the plan as constructed will work or won't work, right? And that's exactly what we get here, right? Everybody's got a plan. Here we see that Dustin has a plan to get revenge on Andy and the Jocks by using Jake the Snake, so his revenge plot is currently in motion. We also see exactly how Robin uses the radio tower to convey coded messages to the rest of the team without the military knowing what they're planning. And then we literally see Mike and Nancy explain the plan for the crawl to their respective platoons, if you will. So they're putting their plan in motion as well. We see that Wills feels a strong connection to Vecna and the hive mind, and we are reminded that it's the first time he's felt anything in quite some time, which indicates that something or someone is coming. Not so much of a plan in and of itself, but maybe a warning sign of a plan being executed that we don't actually see right now. Because we're immediately taken to Holly at her school, which along with Mr. What's-It's appearance, foreshadows the attack on the Wheeler house at the end of the episode, so we can see that Mr. What's-It certainly had a plan during this act, and he was indeed in the midst of executing it. Now, we also see that the military has established a base in the Upside Down and that they're looking for 11 for some currently undisclosed purpose. So the military also has a plan, and that's to capture that ass, right? And though it's already in full swing in the right side up, we see who is pulling the strings in Dr. K at the base in the Upside Down. Now, Act 3 starts with Andy finding the snake in his locker at the high school. And this section lasts 11 minutes and 20 seconds. It's a little short, but it's fine. It's kind of in the sweet spot, which I would say is 12 minutes for an episode that has 4 acts and a teaser and a tag, right? It also includes Karen having the conference with Holly's teacher at school, Will and Lucas at the hospital with Max, and Will finding out that Robin and Vicky and Dustin, finding out about Robin and Vicky, and then Dustin getting beat up at the cemetery by the jocks, and Elle and Mike talking about what's next on the roof of the radio station. And here, remember, Act 3 is typically where the characters find their lowest point, right? Here, Holly gets into trouble at school for talking to imaginary strangers. Lucas is still upset that Max hasn't woken up yet, and this time he looks much more concerned than he did last season when he visited her. Will is apparently traumatized by seeing Robin and Vicky. He's so damn sensitive. Bless his heart, right? And Dustin gets that ass beat for playing games with the basketball players at the cemetery. Definitely his lowest point of the episode. And I think Elle's low point is realizing that this crawl is going to happen without her. Not as dire as some of the other characters, but certainly her lowest point in the episode to this point. Now, Act 4 starts with Hopper arming up and getting the tracker from Jonathan, and this section lasts 13 minutes and 9 seconds. It also includes Steve prepping the van, being joined by Jonathan in Dustin's absence, Hopper and Joyce saying their goodbyes before he goes into the tunnel behind the radio station, Holly overhearing her parents fight about her invisible homie, Hopper surfacing in the radio shack near the gate, and Mike and Lucas helping him sneak into the Upside Down, while Steve and Jonathan track him. The Demogorgon attacking the military convoy, Will passing, and Hopper chasing the Demogorgon into the woods. Now remember, the 4th act is typically where the main characters apply the lessons learned to finally overcome the central conflict, leading to some sort of resolution, and also it can be used to set up the story to come in future episodes, especially if there is no tag. Now, we don't necessarily get that in this particular episode. Instead, we get the crawl. We spent the entire episode planning, which is still a worthwhile way to spend the 4th act of the episode, especially given all the buildup. And we see here that Steve and Jonathan are forced to work together because Dustin's obsession with Eddie's legacy has a trickle-down effect that leads to him being unable to contribute to the plan in the way he was supposed to. We also see that Will's connection to the hive mind is steadily growing stronger and stronger, and ultimately that Hopper has finally had a crawl go wrong, and now he is stuck, at least for the moment, in the Upside Down. And finally, the tag starts with Joyce checking on Will after Will passes out and the power goes out. And this section lasts about 3 minutes. It also includes the Demogorgon racing through the Upside Down, eventually arriving at the Wheeler residence, going inside the house, and ultimately tearing through the ceiling in Holly's room in the right side up. Now, this is a perfect tag as it does a really good job of setting up the second episode, which will, of course, start by showing us the Demogorgon attack at the Wheeler house and the aftermath of the event. Overall, I'd give this particular episode a 75%, or a 7.5 out of 10 if you're thinking IMDb score. And I'll go ahead and give the episode a B- in lieu of a C+ for a letter grade, simply for good measure. After watching this first episode, there are lots of things that I thought worked really well. There are also things that I was truly disappointed in. I think the Duffer Brothers are on the right track as it pertains to making its hardcore audience happy, but I also think there was a lot to be desired, narratively speaking here. I don't really like how the show has been split up in order to drag the story out, but they did something like this last season, so I guess this is simply Netflix trying to milk its biggest show for all it's worth before it ends. That said, I still see it as the best YA show that Netflix has ever produced, and I think that will be true no matter how the series ends. And even though I still contend that this story has taken entirely too long to tell, especially when you consider it has tons of child actors whose coming of age has heavily impacted the feel of the show to this point, the ability to kind of pull you into the whole 1980s, YA feel. I'm still fairly locked into what I hope will be a truly satisfying conclusion. But what do you guys think? Have you had the chance to check out the first episode in the final season of Stranger Things? If you have, what did you think about how the season started? What did you think about so much time having passed since the season 4 finale, both in real life and in the story? What did you think about Nancy, Steve, and Jonathan being right back to where they started? What do you think the military wants with Elle? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you that might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. You can also now support the channel by leaving a super thanks. If you should be so inclined, I'd greatly appreciate it. Also, feel free to subscribe to my new Shorts channel and my Reaction and Reviews channel for additional content. The links are in the description. In addition to that, be sure to go and check out themadScreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write. And I'll catch y'all on the next video.